Hello everyone, welcome to the video 9 of economic lecture series. I'm Dr. Arjun Bopanna of Bangalore IAS Academy. This video is brought to you by Mentors for IAS and Namak KPSC Academy. So in this particular video, we will be talking about government expenditure. So far, we have discussed about government received, both revenue and capital receipts, taxations, disinvestments, etc. Now, we will discuss about government expenditure, how the government spends its money. That is what we will be discussing in this particular video. So when we discussed about the introduction, when we gave the introduction to fiscal policy, I told you that expenditure in India currently is classified into two broad headings. One is revenue expenditure, the other one is capital expenditure. So what is revenue expenditure? Any expenditure, okay, that do not create asset or which does not reduce liability. Okay, so such an expenditure is known as revenue expenditure. It should not reduce the government's liability, like paying away loan. It is not, okay, or it should not create any asset. Whereas capital expenditure is something which creates asset or it reduces liability. See, for example, expenditures on government employees' salaries, pensions, maintenance of law and order. Now let's just give some examples of the same. So salaries, pensions, okay, given to the government employees, maintaining law and order, okay, then giving subsidies, then maintenance, okay, then expenditure on defense. But please remember, in defense there are some expenditure where the government spends money on acquisition of equipments for defense. So when you acquire equipments for defense, it is creating an asset. So when in defense, so therefore don't get confused. So if defense, the money is being spent on salaries, maintenance, etc., then it is revenue expenditure. But in defense, if you are buying an aircraft carrier or you are buying a jet, so here it is creating an asset. Later the government can sell it and get money back. So therefore it is an asset. So that comes under capital. So defense expenditure, as far as it is concerned with revenue expenditures like salaries, pension of defense employees, maintenance, etc., that comes under revenue expenditure. Similarly, the grants that the central government gives to the states or to other countries also come under revenue expenditure, because it is not creating any asset nor it is reducing liabilities. Law and order, right? So the money that is spent on law and order, all these things, maintenance, come under revenue expenditure. Whereas capital expenditure is any expenditure that creates asset or reduce liability. Now let's say asset. So if government spends money on building industries, okay, or setting up new PSU, it is creating an asset. Or if it is building new roads, okay, or it is building bridges, all these are assets from which the government can earn revenue through tolls, etc. Similarly, government spending money, okay, to reduce its liability, that is repaying of loans. When government repay backs the loan it has taken, the government's liability comes down. So such an expenditure is known as capital expenditure. So it's very simple, revenue and capital expenditure. This is how today our budget expenditures are classified. So in this, one of the major revenue expenditure is on subsidies. So food subsidies and fertilizer subsidies, etc., constitute the largest expenditure in terms of revenue expenditure is concerned. But otherwise, largest expenditure is repayment of loans also is the highest expenditure, as we have seen in the graph previously. Now, this is how expenditure are classified since the year 2017. Before 2017, expenditures were classified on the basis of planned and non-planned expenditure. This is how expenditure were classified before 2017. If you recollect, before 2017, we had 5-year plans. We had 5-year plan. Okay, so this 5-year plan was the 5-year plan was done by the Planning Commission. So the Planning Commission was abolished in the year 2014, which was later replaced with Niti Aayog. So here you have to remember these 2 points. One is what is this 5-year plan and what is this Planning Commission. So I'll just very briefly talk about this Planning Commission. So Planning Commission was the apex body in India as far as planning was concerned. It used to plan for the entire country, keeping certain objectives in mind, the resources that it had, and this was it used to plan for every 5 years. So in your NCERT I asked you to read over there, you would have read it, I'm sure. Okay, so every 5 years a plan would be devised by the Planning Commission and it would be implemented for a period of 5 years. Okay, so far we have had 12 5-year plan which ended in the year 2017. Okay, the last plan was between 2012 2017, that is the 12th 5-year plan. The planning started in 1950. The first plan was from 1950 to 1955. So from then onwards we have had 12 plans, 5-year plan. So the Planning Commission plans for 5 years. It decides how much money it has to spend on what all sectors, etc. Now let's say simple example, let's say 2012 to 2017. So the Planning Commission will come up with a plan in the year 2012. It will say that I will be spending totally 1000 crores. In this 1000 crore, I will be spending 100 crore on, let's say, education, 100 crore on healthcare, 100 crore on building infrastructure. So all these expenditures which were incurred in the name of 5-year plan by the Planning Commission was known as planned expenditure. I'll repeat again, all the expenditures that was spent in the name of plan. But who will decide this? It was decided by the Planning Commission. See, please remember, the money used to come from the Consolidated Fund of India, okay, and it was approved by the Parliament, but the decisions were taken by the Planning Commission. So therefore it was known as planned expenditure. I mean, Planning Commission, the chairman was Prime Minister, and then the Planning Commission decisions were all approved by the government. That's a different matter. But whatever was decided by the 5-year plan and was spent was known as planned expenditure. All other expenditures were put under non-planned expenditure. These were accounted for, these are decided by the annual plans or by the government, annual plan. Okay, so this is how expenditures were being spent till 2017. So I'll repeat again, till 2017, expenditures were classified into planned expenditure and non-planned expenditure. So what is planned expenditure? All the expenditures which were spent in the name of 5-year plan, okay, were called as planned expenditure. All the other types of expenditures, okay, which are called as non-planned expenditure. It was assumed that all planned expenditures were capital in nature. That means it created assets. Whereas non-planned expenditures could be classified into capital and revenue. So this gave rise to threefold classification: capital expenditure, planned capital expenditure, non-planned capital expenditure, and non-planned revenue expenditure. See, you might be getting a lot of confusion here. What is this, etc. So this is the reason why even the government also decided to do away with it, and a very simple classification is now adopted, that is revenue and capital expenditure. So I would like to explain a little bit about planned and non-planned expenditure and why it was done away with. Okay. Now this planned and non-planned expenditure was introduced in India on the basis of recommendation of Sukhmoy Chakraborty Committee. So this was classified, the expenditures were therefore classified into your non-planned expenditure and planned expenditure. Non-planned was revenue and capital expenditure. So planned expenditure, any expenditure that was spent on 5-year plan. Let's take some examples. Non-planned revenue expenditure. Non-planned means it was not part of the 5-year plan, and revenue expenditure, as a definition itself, it does not create any asset, nor reduce any liability. So interest payment on the loans the government has taken, expenditure incurred on defense services, not on Equipment, please remember this: subsidies, grants given to the states, union territories, pension, social service, healthcare, education, social security, etc. Police, economic services that the government offers, like agriculture, industry, power, science and technology, whatever economic service the government offers to the public. Then grants given by the government to foreign government. Please keep these points in mind. These are all revenue expenditures, earlier put under non-planned revenue expenditure. Then, as I told you, there were some non-planned expenditure which were capital in nature. Capital means either it should reduce the liability or it should increase assets. So when government spends money on defense equipment or modernization, buying aircrafts, etc. Similarly, loans that were given to the states, union territories or public sector companies, etc. Also, it created an asset because the government would get interest from that. So it created an asset for the government. So therefore, it was capital expenditure. Then you had planned expenditure. So those which were related to long-term socio-economic goals as determined the planning process. So planning as such we will discuss later. I just told you very briefly that plans were 5-year plans were determined by the 5-year planning commission. Okay, the chairman of whom was the prime minister, and you had a deputy chairman, etc. So they used to determine how much resources we have, what are the broad objective, how much how much money we should spend on education, healthcare, etc. What is the target, what we need to achieve, and they would then in turn give that money to the state government in the form of centrally sponsored scheme. Okay, through centrally sponsored schemes, the government would spend money on various sectors and give that money to the state government, okay, to spend on various sectors. So in order to achieve what? Long-term socio-economic goal. So it was related to specific schemes and projects, usually routed through the central ministry to the state government. Now let's say, for example, in case of let's say health. Okay, so in health, the government of India would come up with a scheme called as National Health Mission. So through the 5-year plan, okay, 5-year plan, the government will say that I will spend 100 crore, okay, for health. And for that, it will come up with a scheme called as National Health Mission. Under the National Health Mission, the government will say that this 100 crore, I will give it to the state government. It will share it between all the state government. Each state will get its share. And the state government will implement this scheme called as National Health Mission. Another example, if I try to take for education. Okay, so government will say that I will spend 100 crore in the 12th 5-year plan for education, for which it will come up with a scheme called as Sarva Shikshan Abhiyan. So Sarva Shikshan Abhiyan, it will say I will allocate 100 crores, and this, who will implement it? The Sarva Shikshan Abhiyan will not be implemented by the central government directly. It will be implemented by the state government, for which, as a centrally sponsored scheme, for which the central government will allocate 100 crore to every state. Every state will now implement Sarva Shikshan Abhiyan. This is how the expenditures were done in the planned expenditure. Now coming back to planned expenditure, they were related to specific schemes like Sarva Shikshan Abhiyan, National Health Mission, JNNURM, etc. They were routed through central ministries to the state government, and this was generally in addition to assistance through central taxes which were determined through finance commissions. Finance commission would allocate certain amount of tax from the divisible pool to the state government. I'll explain to you in a while, in the later videos, what is finance commission. In addition to that, the central government would give money to the state government through centrally sponsored schemes. So various centrally sponsored schemes which you would have heard of, all these were being funded by the central government. That's why it's called a centrally sponsored scheme. They were decided earlier by the planning commission, and the money that was spent through this channel was put under what was known as planned expenditure. This whole classification was having inherent problem. Let's have a look at it and why it was done away with. Now, for you to understand the problem, let me give you a simple example. Okay, with respect to education. So central government would fund certain initiatives to promote education. On one hand, it would come up with a scheme like Sarva Shikshan Abhiyan, okay, for which money would be given to the state government. Money would be given to the state government, okay, for building schools, teachers, etc. Under which scheme? Under the Sarva Shikshan Abhiyan scheme. On the other hand, the central government also will be running various schools like Kendriya Vidyalaya, Navodaya Vidyalaya, etc., or various other educational or universities, etc. So these don't come under Sarva Shikshan Abhiyan, or they don't come under centrally sponsored scheme. These educational institutions will be run by whom? It will be run by the central government directly, whereas this Sarva Shikshan Abhiyan will be by the state government. So I hope you are getting the difference. So the same central government will be spending money on education, one through Sarva Shikshan Abhiyan, the other directly through its department. Now the problem arises here. The problem is that the money is now getting divided between two schemes to achieve the same objective. The objective is to increase education standards in our country. But on one hand, you are spending money on Sarva Shikshan Abhiyan, and then you are spending money to the Kendriya Vidyalayas and Navodaya Vidyalayas. So here, this expenditure on Kendriya Vidyalaya, Navodaya Vidyalaya teachers, the teachers' expenditure, salary, etc. of Kendriya Vidyalayas, they came under revenue non-planned expenditure, whereas the money on teachers who were hired under Sarva Shikshan Abhiyan came under planned expenditure. See the difference here. So the money, I'll repeat again, the money that was being spent for the salaries of teachers under Sarva Shikshan Abhiyan came under planned expenditure because they were being spent through central sponsored schemes. Whereas the teachers' expenditures like salary, pensions of the Kendriya Vidyalaya came under the revenue non-planned expenditure. Same teacher, so same teachers' salaries. If they were under Sarva Shikshan, it was called as planned expenditure. If it was through direct Kendriya Vidyalayas, they were called as non-planned revenue expenditure. See the confusion over here. Another example I will tell you. Now let's take health. So government of India comes up with a scheme called as National Health Mission, which will be implemented by the states. The state government will hire doctors, okay, under the National Health Mission. Same way, the central government also will have various institutions, let's say AIMS. So under the AIMS, various doctors will be hired. Now, the salaries of doctors under National Health Mission came under the planned expenditure because they were being spent under the centrally sponsored scheme, whereas the doctor salary of the AIMS institution, they came under the non-planned revenue expenditure. See the confusion here. So the expenditures were unscientifically divided, okay, which had no meaning. So government was spending same kind of resources but in different headings. Okay, so that is why the confusion started to arise. Okay, and another problem was that building a bridge, okay, was under the planned, whereas its maintenance was under the non-planned. Now let's see the problem from this. So the central government will give the state government money to build a bridge. Good. So the state government will build a bridge, okay, because it came under the planned. Maintenance was not sponsored by the central government. So who had to do the maintenance? Maintenance has to be done by the state government itself. But state was not getting any money because it was not part of the planned expenditure. And the state were reluctant to give money on maintenance. So bridges were built, but they were not maintained. This is the problem in India. Infrastructures are built, but they are not maintained because maintenance does not come under the planned expenditure, and the most important maintenance gets affected. So roads, beautiful roads are built. After 2-3 years, potholes starts appearing because they are not maintained, because maintenance come under non-planned expenditure and they were not given importance. So this is the problems that the government started to see between the bifurcation of planned and non-planned expenditures. Because of these problems, and because of the overall doing away with the concept of 5-year plans and planning commission itself, the government did not have to worry about this kind of classification and changed all this planned and non-planned classification into simple revenue and capital expenditure. So before that, this we'll just again recap what we have discussed. The classification gave rise to misleading notion that planned expenditure is developmental, non-planned is non-developmental. Like building bridge was considered planned and it was developmental, whereas maintenance was considered non-planned and it was considered non-development. So therefore, it led to neglect of items such as maintenance, etc. It also led to acute shortage of regular cadre staff because most of the money was being spent on schemes which hired contract laborers. Regular cadre staff started to get affected. The bifurcation also contributed to fragmentation of available resources. In our example, we saw that the money for education was being spent on two different schemes. One was through centrally sponsored schemes, that is through your Sarva Shikshan Abhiyan. The other was through regular cadre schools, that is Navodaya Vidyalaya and Kendriya Vidyalayas. So this gave rise to the fragmentation of the available resources. Now the money was less, but it had to be spent to two different schemes. Then the government set up this committee, Rangarajan panel, which observed the following weaknesses of this planned and non-planned. It said that this led to fragmented view of resource allocation. So making it difficult to ascertain the cost of delivery of services, because see, healthcare you were spending on two different schemes, education you were spending on different schemes, etc. So we could not ascertain the cost of delivery of services, and also we could not link with outlay and outcome. How much money we are spending, that is outlay, and what is the benefit we are actually getting could not be actually determined. So therefore, it also observed that there was neglect of essential non-planned revenue expenditures like maintenance. So therefore, assets were being built, but they were not being maintained. So it recommended that you provide an appropriate budgetary framework, just simply focusing on revenue and capital expenditure. So this led to the doing away with the concept of planned and non-planned expenditure, and today in India we follow revenue expenditure and capital expenditure. You can pause the video here and see the difference. So as I already told you, anything that is incurred by the government which does not create any asset or does not reduce liability is known as revenue expenditure. So these are usually incurred in the normal functioning of the government, day-to-day functioning, like paying salaries, maintenance, law and order, etc. Day-to-day functioning. Whereas this is mainly for acquisition of capital. It does not create any asset, whereas capital, it creates asset. It is recurring in nature, keeps happening. You have to keep paying salaries, you have to keep paying pensions, you have to keep giving subsidies. So therefore it is recurring in nature, whereas capital expenditure is non-recurring in nature. And revenue expenditure is short period expenditure, whereas capital expenditure is long period expenditure. Now imagine building a road. So it is not happening in 1 or 2 days. It's a long term expenditure, 10 years, etc. So it has got a long gestational period. Example is expenditure on medicines and salaries, doctors, etc. Example is building of hospitals. So this is capital and revenue expenditure difference. So please keep these things in mind. So one of the major expenditures, so now you have understood expenditures can be salaries, pensions, maintenance, law and order, building assets, buying equipments, repayment of loans. All these are different types of expenditure. One of the major expenditure is your subsidy. So in the next video we will discuss subsidies. What is subsidies? Why do we need subsidies? What are merits and non-merit subsidies? What is the challenges or issues relating to subsidies in India, and how do we reform it, and what the government is doing to reform the subsidies? So if we complete subsidies, that will complete our entire budget discussion, that is income and expenditure of the government. Now let's just solve some question relating to what we have discussed today. With reference to union budget, which of the following are covered under non-planned expenditure? Non-planned expenditure, again, what is non-planned? Those expenditure which are incurred not through 5-year plan. So defense expenditure, I told you, defense expenditure is non-planned expenditure. If it is dealing with the acquisition of assets, then it is capital expenditure. Otherwise, it is revenue expenditure. But either ways, it is non-planned expenditure. Then interest payment, that is also non-planned. Salaries and pension, that's also one, and subsidies, that is also non-planned. So all the 4, option C. Okay, so question like this can be asked in your examination. From your mains point of view, you also have to analyze, okay, why planned and non-planned was done away with, and currently we adopt revenue and capital expenditure. This is both at the central level as well as the state level. Okay, so such kind of analytical question can be asked in your mains also. So I will end our this video with over here. I hope these videos are useful. Please like and share. Okay, if you need any if you have any doubts, please do write in the comment section. I will reply to them. Thank you so much and have a good day.